The Sterling Room wasn't merely a restaurant, it was the very epitome of prestige in Manhattan. Crystal chandeliers hung from coffered ceilings, casting a warm glow over tables where business deals were struck and reputations were solidified. White orchids adorned every table, their fragile petals a reflection of the delicate egos that dined beneath them. To step into these hallowed halls was to announce one's arrival into New York's elite social scene. Margaret Walker entered, through the heavy glass doors, instantly catching the attention of the room. Her simple black dress, chosen for comfort after a grueling 20-hour flight from Singapore, hung loosely on her slender frame. Wrinkles from airport terminals and cramped economy seats told their own story. Her chestnut hair, usually styled with precision, had escaped its hurried ponytail and now fell in wisps around her tired face. Dark circles under her eyes reflected back-to-back meetings and the disorienting effects of crossing multiple time zones. She hadn't even stopped at her hotel, coming straight from JFK with only a small carry-on, which she discreetly placed by the host stand. Margaret had prioritized punctuality over appearance, an unusual choice for the Sterling Room. "I believe Antonio is expecting me," she said quietly to the host, who studied her with thinly veiled skepticism. At the center table sat Richard Harrington, a hedge fund manager whose reputation was well known in Manhattan's elite circles. His Savro suit fit him like armor, his Swiss watch catching the light with every deliberate gesture. His companions, similarly well-dressed and coiffed, hung on his every word. Richard was one of those men who gauged his worth by how effectively he could put others down. His specialty was delivering casual cruelty, just witty enough that bystanders felt comfortable laughing along. He collected these moments like trophies: the stammering waiter, the flustered shop girl, the tourist asking for directions. It wasn't about fame or followers. It was a simpler, primal rush, the power that came from public humiliation. Richard's attention shifted as Margaret was led to her table. His predatory gaze took in her rumpled appearance, the evident fatigue, the simplicity of her attire. A slow smile spread across his face, the same smile that had preceded many humiliations. "Well, well," he murmured to his companions, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "Looks like someone got lost on the way to the diner down the street." His companions snickered, drawing more attention to Margaret. She noticed, of course, but unlike Richard's usual targets, she didn't shrink. Instead, she met his gaze, directly. Her tired eyes sharpened, assessing. The hunt had begun, but this time the prey was watching the hunter. Margaret opened her menu, her fingers still stiff from the plane's recycled air. The Sterling Room's signature lighting, designed to flatter the wealthy clientele, bathed the pristine tablecloth in a soft glow. She could feel Richard's gaze on her, cataloging every perceived flaw: the faint coffee stain on her sleeve, her worn shoes, and the absence of designer accessories that served as the unspoken entry fee to the Sterling Room. A young waiter approached, his practiced smile faltering when he saw her. He was probably in his mid-20s, standing with the careful posture of someone who had learned that perfect service was his only protection in rooms full of power. "Perhaps Madam would prefer our prix-fixe option?" he suggested, pointedly avoiding mention of the chef's tasting menu. The most expensive choice. His eyes briefly flicked toward Richard's table, silently seeking approval for his handling of the situation. "The full tasting menu, please," Margaret replied, her voice calm with quiet confidence, momentarily confusing the waiter. "And sparkling water for now. I'll decide on wine after speaking with Antonio." The mention of the owner's name caused the faintest flicker of uncertainty in the waiter's eyes, but he nodded professionally and withdrew. Richard's laughter cut through the ambient noise, sharp and pointed. "Better check your credit limit first, honey. That menu costs more than your entire outfit." Several diners turned to watch the spectacle unfold. It was part of the unspoken entertainment of the Sterling Room, the occasional public takedown that served as a reminder of the social hierarchy's rigid boundaries, a ritual of reinforcement, where those within the circle reminded others why they were kept on the outside. Margaret took a slow sip of water, never breaking eye contact with Richard. "I'm sure I'll manage," she replied calmly, only further fueling Richard's need to assert his dominance. He leaned back in his chair, studying her with theatrical disdain, a performer playing to his audience. The slight tilt of his head invited others to join in the assessment. Let me guess, big night out, once-in-a-lifetime splurge, or just lost? Each question was another dart aimed at her dignity. Tourist bucket list, maybe? Eat where the real New Yorkers eat? Margaret placed her napkin in her lap with deliberate care. Just hungry. Her succinct response seemed to irritate Richard more than any defense might have. Conversations around them quieted and the surrounding diners became passive observers to the drama unfolding. You know, Richard continued, his voice deliberately rising to ensure it carried to the surrounding tables. There's a perfectly decent diner 10 blocks south, plastic menus, free refills. Much more your ambiance. He emphasized the word ambiance with exaggerated precision, as if educating a child. His companions snickered, emboldened by his cruelty. A woman wearing diamonds at the next table barely concealed a smirk behind her hand. An older gentleman frowned slightly but said nothing, his silence a form of complicity. Thank you for the recommendation, Margaret replied evenly. Perhaps another time. The waiter returned with sparkling water, his hand trembling slightly, as he poured. Richard caught his eye and winked conspiratorially, a gesture that seemed to say, "We both know she doesn't belong here." The young man tensed imperceptibly as he finished his task and withdrew, avoiding Margaret's gaze. His retreat was the withdrawal of a potential ally, another small victory for Richard. Richard, sensing an opportunity, casually strolled toward Margaret's table, wineglass in hand, a predator moving in for the kill. The room seemed to hold its breath. Even the soft classical music playing through hidden speakers seemed to fade. I'm just trying to save you from embarrassment, he said, his voice oozing false concern. This place has standards. Doesn't it feel a bit aspirational for someone like you? The Sterling room had turned into a stage, with Richard center stage and Margaret cast unwillingly as his foil. A woman at a nearby table discreetly raised her phone, eager to capture the moment. Someone like me? Margaret echoed, meeting his gaze for the first time. Something flickered behind her tired eyes, a depth that gave Richard pause. Not fear, not anger, but something he couldn't quite place. It disappeared before he could identify it. Richard hesitated for a moment, thrown off by the unexpected intensity of her gaze, but quickly recovered, glancing around to ensure his audience was still engaged. Well, let's be honest, he continued. You're clearly not from around here. He gestured dismissively at her appearance, the diamond cufflink on his hand glinting in the light. The Sterling room has a certain clientele, a certain quality we've come to expect. The room had grown quieter, even the waitstaff frozen, watching the scene unfold with practiced neutrality that barely masked their discomfort. A sommelier stopped mid-pour, the wine hovering above the crystal glass. And you're the arbiter of quality? Margaret asked, her voice calm but with a new edge that made several diners shift uneasily in their seats. Her question wasn't defensive, it was almost curious, as if she were studying a specimen. Richard laughed, feeding off his audience's energy. I don't need to be. Quality announces itself. He gestured at her again. It's the opposite. Few nervous chuckles rippled through the room, but many were starting to look uncomfortable. The entertainment value of his cruelty was beginning to fade. An older couple exchanged glances and subtle head shakes. A young woman with a designer purse looked down at her plate, no longer a willing spectator. Interesting perspective, Margaret said, folding her hands on the table. A subtle shift had occurred in her posture, no longer fatigued but alert. The weariness in her eyes was replaced by a cool, calculating clarity, a poised strength that hadn't been there moments before. Richard, mistaking her composure for weakness, moved closer, the predator closing in. Sure of his dominance in this territory he considered his own. Look, I'm doing you a favor. Places like this eat little strays like you alive. Why don't you, Mr. Harrington? Margaret interrupted, her voice now carrying a quiet authority that froze him mid-sentence. She hadn't raised her volume, but her words resonated through the room with perfect clarity. Is public humiliation always your opening move? Or am I receiving special treatment tonight? The room fell silent. Every eye was locked on this unexpected confrontation. The power dynamic so clear just moments ago suddenly seemed far less certain. Richard's smile faltered and doubt crept into his expression. She knew his name. She hadn't been guessing. The Sterling room became still, the atmosphere charged with anticipation. Richard's confident grin hung awkwardly as Margaret's gaze remained unwavering. "I make it my business to know the regulars," she said simply, her weary appearance belying the steel in her voice. Richard faltered, his smile now fully gone. Margaret's calm resolve had shifted the balance. Her eyes never left his, unwavering, as if daring him to respond. 3 days later, Richard Harrington stood in his penthouse, gazing out at Central Park, his phone in hand, his mind still reeling from the events that had unfolded. The viral footage from the Sterling Room incident had spread like wildfire overnight. The video, shaky and unrefined, captured every moment of his downfall, the cruel comments, Margaret's unshaken composure, Antonio's explosive defense, and Richard's ignominious exit through the kitchen. Dossy Rich Bully was trending across the nation. His social media accounts hemorrhaged followers at a shocking rate. Calls from business associates went unanswered, and invitations to exclusive dinners suddenly ceased. The carefully constructed empire of fear and influence he'd built for years began to crumble like a house of cards caught in a storm. The online comments were relentless and unyielding. Finally, someone stood up to him. "I've been waiting years to see this happen. This is the guy who once made my sister cry when she worked as a waitress for him." Richard's phone buzzed with a message from his publicist. "It's beyond repair. I strongly recommend a social media blackout. We'll talk tomorrow about an exit strategy." Exit strategy, like he was some failed business deal instead of a person, reduced to being a public spectacle. Meanwhile, across town, in a modest suburban neighborhood, laughter and joy filled the air of a cozy 2-story home. Children raced each other across the lush green yard while adults gathered around picnic tables laden with homemade food. The warm scent of barbecue lingered in the air, signaling a peaceful evening. Margaret, now more at ease in a pair of jeans and a simple blouse, stood beside Antonio at the grill. They both enjoyed beers and exchanged stories as old friends do. "You should have seen his face," Antonio chuckled, expertly flipping burgers. 20 years running the Sterling Room, and I've never had more fun kicking someone out." Margaret smiled, her eyes soft as she watched Antonio's youngest daughter teach her own children how to play volleyball. "Some lessons have to be taught in public," she said quietly. "The powerful rarely listen otherwise." Antonio's tone shifted slightly. "Speaking of power," he lowered his voice. "Singapore went well. The water access agreement." Margaret nodded, taking a sip of her beer. 5 million people will have access to clean water by next year. Every minute of that flight was worth it. As twilight descended over the backyard gathering, no one mentioned Richard or the scene at the Sterling Room. Here, among true friends and family, titles and wealth didn't matter. What truly mattered was the genuine connection shared over simple food, shared laughter, and meaningful conversation, a richness that Richard, for all his money, would never truly understand. As the sun set, leaving behind the quiet beauty of the evening, the story of Margaret's unexpected triumph served as a reminder. True power isn't measured by designer suits, exclusive reservations, or social standing. It's found in the quiet dignity of those who know their worth, no matter how others perceive them. Margaret's journey from being ridiculed to commanding respect happened in the blink of an eye, but its impact would remain with everyone who witnessed it. How often do we judge others based on their appearance only to later discover the depth of their character? Have you ever experienced being underestimated or watched as someone else was dismissed because they didn't fit a certain image? Share your story in the comments below. Where are you watching from today? We're building a community that values substance over superficial judgments. If this story resonated with you, don't keep it to yourself. Hit that subscribe button to join our growing family of storytellers who believe in the power of human dignity and unexpected heroes. Remember, in a world quick to judge, sometimes the most profound statement is simply standing your ground and saying, "Mock me again." New stories of triumph, justice, and unexpected heroes arrive every week. Turn on notifications so you never miss the moment when someone like Margaret walks into a room and changes everything. Until next time, remember that the most powerful people in any room are often the ones making the least noise.